Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the 11th annual Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference. I'm Leah Langby from the IFLS Library System, and assisting me today is Coles Rostlick from the Winding Rivers Library System. And I'm very glad to welcome Nick Dembski, who will be talking to us about climate justice. I'm just going to let you take it away, Nick. Thank you.
Right on. Thank you. First thing I just want to say is thank you to Leah and Cole and Jamie and all the other organizers of this conference. I've been an attendee since the very first one that occurred, and I'm very honored to get to share something with everybody today. So thanks so much for reaching out and inviting me to contribute in this way. So the title of this, hopefully I can make sure, yeah, there we go, that I can see my own screen. The title of this presentation is Climate Justice, the Interdependence of Sustainability and Equity and How Libraries Can Act as Hubs for Both. That's a long title. There's a lot of words in there to pay attention to, but I want you to pay attention to one. In justice work, I'm going to talk about justice work a lot. I have a lot of background in different areas of justice work, but I believe that libraries are justice work, ultimately, essentially. And in justice work, we talk about intersectionality a lot, how like racial justice intersects with economic justice, intersects with feminist justice, intersects with queer justice, food justice, on and on. But interdependence is not a word that is used that much, but I want to highlight it in this title, just because I believe that sustainability and equity, I believe you can't actually have true sustainability without equity. And I also believe that you can't have true equity without sustainability. So I want you to keep those concepts in mind as we go through these slides. And we will just jump right in. Let's see if this, okay, we love it when the slides actually change for us. So I recognize I'm talking to library folk today. Many just might not be familiar with a lot of the concepts that I'm going to touch on. To give the landscape of this, I'm going to give you quite a bit of context for my community, my library, things of that nature. And then I'm going to talk about a specific grant and project that we did with that grant. So the first thing I want to just talk about is what is climate justice? And I'm going to start with this quote from Daisy Simmons, an article that she had via Yale Climate Connections, which I'll actually bring up again later. The quote is, understanding climate justice, she says, begins with the idea that the adverse impacts of a warming climate are not felt equitably among people. We'll talk about examples of what that means in just a bit, but want to distinguish between three terms. So the first is environmentalism. So most people know this term. It's basically the preservation, protection of wildlife, and preservation of nature, kind of simply put. But it's not to be confused with environmental justice. Environmental justice is sort of environmentalism, but through an equity lens, through a lens of social justice. And so even though it's very concerned with the natural world, with wildlife, with all the things environmentalism would be concerned with, it centers humanity also, and how humanity is treated, and when dealing with the problems and implementing the solutions to environmental problems. And then the last one is climate justice. Now, a lot of people will use environmental justice and climate justice as interchangeable terms, or they say EJ or CJ, and that's not really a big deal in my opinion. I think that's kind of fine, but a lot of other people will define climate justice a little bit differently, because climate justice, they would say, specifically has to do with not just like environmental issues, but specifically with the climate crisis that we are globally experiencing on planet Earth, right? And so specifically how different people, as this quote above, you know, the impacts of the warming climate are not felt equitably among people. And how do we have to move differently when trying to resolve this issue so that there are further inequities exacerbated by our attempts at solutions. Last thing I want to say before moving on from this slide, you know, I wrote why libraries at the bottom. So, you know, talking about climate issues, even talking about equity, you know, these are much more common things now, but a lot of people are kind of like, what do libraries have to do with these, especially people outside of the library field, right? And I would just say that, well, so I always say that libraries are not about literacy first. I believe that libraries are about healing and justice first, and literacy just happens to be an incredibly effective vehicle to establish justice and healing and equity in a community. So there's that. But I would also just say that even though different libraries, depending on like who works there or who is in leadership of them, or even who's in leadership of the municipality or whatever that they're a part of, like different libraries have different levels of dedications to equity and how much equity work they bring into their community. That for sure is true. But the structure, the very structure of libraries, and specifically of public libraries, has equity built into it in a systemic structural way that very few other structures in the United States of America, and frankly across the world, have. And that is just, I believe that the public library is the most radical institution in the United States of America. And largely it's because of how equity is so structurally baked in to all of its mechanisms. So what that could look like for a library might, you know, how a library is exercising equity, it might look like this. It might look like this Hispanic Heritage Month event that we had at the Racine Public Library, where we hosted Chinelo masked costume dancers. This is like a tradition that sort of blends indigenous and Catholic traditions for this really interesting, unique cultural expression. So equity through a library might look like this, right? Hosting an event to honor or to observe a time that is meant to honor a specific community, and a specific community that actually is very, very present in the Racine community. We have a lot of Latinx people in the Racine community. Or equity at libraries might look like this. So this is just a meeting room where this is a group of public allies. Public Allies, if you don't know that program, really awesome nationwide program that is basically tries to create leaders and people, young people especially, but not exclusively, that would often be left out of community leadership opportunities. And so like, it's obviously like a majority BIPOC group here, and they're just using one of our meeting rooms to create vision boards for themselves, to envision what their lives could look like and what they could achieve together. And so equity could look like this, not just that, you know, folks in the community are using our meeting room, but libraries being intentional about who is using our resources, noticing who isn't using our resources, who historically has not been prioritized for using our resources. And how do we create that invitation differently? How do we actively reach out to let people know, hey, this is your library too. These are your resources. This is your house. You paid for it. It's yours. Come use it. You're welcome here. The last thing I'll say, this is one more way, though, that equity can look in the library. So this is Alexander. I've known him since he was pre-verbal, and he was coming to my story times. But he's standing in front of what is a very old card catalog, like an ancient card catalog that was really rickety, and one of our employees, Mike, refurbished it and brought it back to life. And then another employee, Brianna, just made it beautiful. She's very artistically talented. So as you can see, she, made it look like something new. But Alexander's here getting seeds. This is a seed library. And this is the first day that we put the seed library out. Alexander came with his mom the first day. And the reason why I say this is an equity tactic is because whether you grew up, the Racine County area is very diverse in a lot of ways. But so some people have grown up on farms here in Racine County, and like this is part and parcel to their whole lives and their family legacies. But I live in the inner city of Racine, right? And even though I didn't grow up in inner cities, like I just didn't really like this, planting seeds was not something I really did or like had interest in, or like, and it wasn't that the accessibility wasn't there, it just wasn't a thing. And for many people in the area where I live, it's just not a thing that will naturally come into their life, ironically. It's part of inner city living to some degree. But this seed library, as an equity tactic for the library itself, just makes sure that that can happen, that whether you grew up on a farm or you live in the hood in inner city Racine, like you can get seeds for free, no matter what your economic situation is, and you can grow your own food and maybe even just become a little more self-sufficient in a broken food system, because the Racine Public Library is in a food desert, and much of the city of Racine is a food desert. So again, just like small things, but you stack them on top of each other, and a library can really lead and change, move the needle in terms of equity in its communities. So this is, I know I'm talking sort of like abstractly about these concepts. I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically. So environmental or climate justice. Again, going to start with a quote. This is from an article by Kellyanne Smith that was in Forbes of June 2021. According to the American Public Health Association, communities of color are likely to experience pre-existing health conditions and poor living conditions. Oops, I might have skipped a word. Oh, no, yeah. And poor living conditions are more likely to experience pre-existing health conditions and poor living conditions than their white counterparts, and a lack of power and representation in political and economic systems makes it difficult for these communities to build climate resilience or the ability to prepare and respond to extreme events that occur due to climate change. So what this can mean in terms of examples, and we could go all day with this, but we'll just kind of try to use two. If an extreme weather event were to happen here in Racine, Wisconsin, like a heat wave, say, and you're part of the communities of color here, you're a community member of color, you are just statistically just much more likely to have much less resources than your white counterparts. There's a huge racial wealth gap, like one of the very greatest racial wealth gaps in the nation, in the Racine area, and Milwaukee actually was at least ranked among the worst, like the very worst for that. So this area has a lot of problems with racial wealth gap. But so that's one thing, but that also means that, again, in the case of an extreme weather event like a heat wave, you're just less likely to have what she calls here climate resilience strategies or tactics built into your life. So that could mean something as simple as you don't have an air conditioner, right? But it also could mean something as simple as you don't have transportation. You don't have a car to go from your house that doesn't have air conditioning during a heat wave to the library, which acts as a cooling shelter, right? And there are just, again, countless, like whenever this conversation happens, people who are skeptic about it will say, well, what about, why not just do this? Or why not just do this? Or why not just do this? And long story short, the systemic inequities just create barriers at every single level of why don't you just do this? So I won't go through more examples than that, but hopefully that at least gives some concrete examples for people to understand a little better who are new to it. So I'm going to talk about the city of Racine, the community a little bit, going to talk about the library a little bit, and then going to talk about the sort of environmental activism landscape here. The city of Racine, 78,000 people. There's 200,000 in the entire county, so we're definitely like the urban core, the heart of the county, the major population center. The municipality is chronically underfunded. This is not unusual, that unusual in the state of Wisconsin, largely because the state has very terrible shared revenue funding structures, and it is disabling a lot of municipalities. And that's why the state has like I think like a $7 billion surplus right now. And I do hope that state leadership reconsiders all of that because it's only very affluent communities that are not suffering under that and have been suffering for a long time. But certainly the city of Racine is a chronically underfunded municipality. You will always hear the words like structural deficit when you are in city council meetings and things like that. City of Racine has very high poverty and historically the state's highest unemployment, even higher than Milwaukee. And just as of this most recent census, for the first time, I think since it's been colonized, the Racine community, the city of Racine specifically, is a majority BIPOC community. So the majority of our community members are community members of color. They're not white, but the major demographics here are white, Black, and Latinx, and we certainly have others, but those make up over probably 90% of the population here. Lest you walk away thinking, wow, Racine just sounds like a really terrible place. Like, I just wanted to show you some of Racine. So this is the Root River. While it's a little frozen over years ago from the vantage point of the railroad tracks that go over it. Racine is this beautiful, life-giving, wonderful, life-filled place, right? And people like me love it, not despite its challenges, but largely because of its challenges. So this is important to me, though, because this is like right in the center of the inner city. It's like an urban area, and then there's this beautiful natural strip of river that just goes through. And when you're kayaking on the river, like, you would never know you're in a city, right? Here's just a picture of a mural with a line of poetry from a poet who was killed in a car crash here named Aaron Lundquist. So community members coming together, raising funds, artists doing designs of this, and a local muralist doing the mural, and a business owner just saying, yeah, you can use my wall. Community members coming together to create culture and honor the culture makers in the community. This is a photo of a sunrise wedding that I went to during the pandemic at North Beach, which is a 5-minute drive from my house, right? This is my friends Nick and Nicole getting married. And this is one of the best freshwater beaches in the entire world. This is a praying mantis that I found in my backyard on my squash blossoms. It's the only praying mantis I've ever seen in my adult life. We could go on and on. This is the Root River again, and it's some of the rapids on it. So a whitewater kayaker like me can go into a rapid like this and surf for hours all day. And it's, again, just amazing. This is a 15-minute drive from my home. The last photo I'll show, this is from even in the dead of winter, right? There's just natural glory here in Racine. And this is just a shot of Racine after a big fresh snowfall from the front doorstep of my house. So that's some of Racine. Want to give a picture of the Racine Public Library because when you give a presentation like this, a lot of people are like, yeah, but that's a bigger library or that's a smaller library than us or whatever. And I don't know if the scope and scale matches as well. So just to explain some of our details, we have a $4.3 million budget. We lost $250,000 of city funding when the pandemic hit. So we're at $250K more from the city prior to the pandemic. We have about 68 staff members at any given point right now. We have one branch, or to be more accurate, I guess, like one main library, one building, and then one bookmobile. And we serve a 137,000 person service area. So just inadequate resources for that amount of service area to just like get to the heart of it. And many of you probably will be familiar with the Wisconsin library standards. You know, they sort of have metrics that say like, all right, you're either meeting like the basic criteria, or you're sort of like in the middle criteria, or you're like, you know, hitting like the excellent criteria for these standards. The Racine Public Library does not even meet the basic criteria for most of the metrics in the Wisconsin library standards. So again, a library, just like its community, that is really underfunded, is really under-resourced, and really has a lot of challenges to overcome all the time. But the thing is, we do overcome those challenges all the time. So just to give a few photos of the library, you know, bringing life to the community. This is me and one of our very best patrons, Jenny. We're having lunch outside of the library during the summer. Been bringing food trucks on Wednesdays. So this is one of the food truck Wednesdays that I got to share with Jenny. This is a group of kids. In 2019, actually, was when this picture was taken, when we started our first bilingual story time, which is called the Hora del Cuento. And they all did crafts. Those are little turkeys. I did not make the turkey that I'm holding. A little girl did who's not pictured, and she gifted it to me. But just, you know, a really fun group, and a group that loved getting to have at the library. And lastly, so the woman standing is Viridiana Rocha. This was in 2019 also. She was an intern at this time, but now she is a fully credentialed master's degree holding librarian at the Racine Public Library. And we are very happy to have her there. But this is just her, you know, doing a craft with some kids who were just at the library, just having, you know, having a blast. They were so sweet. And this, I could, again, just picture after picture after picture of this, right? Like good experiences are happening at the library and because of the library every minute of every day. And so, again, I don't love the library despite its challenges. I love the library because of its challenges and how well it overcomes its challenges. So lastly, I just want to talk about, before we get into like the project, I want to talk about Racine's environmental activism landscape. So because it's different than the community, it's very robust and active. So we have a chapter of the Sierra Club. We have a presence of Citizens Climate Lobby, which I'll mention later, but it's a group that engages with government and government systems to try to get structural level and policy level change to climate issues. We have the Clean Power Coalition, Alliance for Great Lakes, Root River Environmental Education Center, UW Extension Outreach, who actually really helped us create that seed library you saw earlier. some zero waste efforts, Gateway Technical College's annual Eco Fest, a lot of faith community efforts that are focused on eco-justice stuff. Greening Greater Racine, which acts as a coalition, umbrella organization to highlight the rest of these organizations and efforts and resources around environmentalism in the community. So if you went onto their website, you could see a whole bunch of other stuff that exists in the Racine community. The last two that I'll mention, they both really changed my life. So one is the Racine Urban Garden Network. So when I was living in an apartment downtown for years, you know, there's just like nothing around but concrete. I could ride my bike a few blocks away to what was like an old abandoned factory site that they turned into over 100 garden plots. And I got to like see how life happens there, right? I got to put seeds in the dirt and eat the fruit that they bore. And that was life-changing, and it still is. And I'm so glad and grateful for the Racine Urban Garden Network. But also the Eco Justice Center. This is a farm ministry run by Dominican nuns in the county here. And they have like alpacas and guinea hens and goats and chickens and long-necked geese and a windmill and solar panels. And it's just one of the most glorious places you could ever go. And it literally was born out of dream sessions that they had together. So I'm talking about like, this is just a fraction of the environmental activism stuff that exists in the Racine landscape. I could go on and on. So it's very robust, but it's also overwhelmingly white, which, as I mentioned, our community simply isn't. And it's also like mostly middle class, upper middle class, or higher is who's participating in it. And it's mostly older and retired people. So when we think about sustainability, right, in broader terms, like you can't, that's not sustainable if those are the only people keeping these efforts alive in your community, and you need to figure something out about that. So that kind of brings me to this grant opportunity that came up. So the grant opportunity is called, excuse me, Resilient Communities, Libraries Respond to Climate Change. This grant was posted and provided by ALA with funding from philanthropists Andrew and Carol Phelps. The grant application timeline was like summer and fall of 2020. And the grant execution timeline was like winter and spring of 2021. Excuse me. So a little of the what and how of the grant. The Racine Public Library did, and I, through the library, applied for this grant. And the first thing I want to say about it is we partnered with the Environmental and Sustainability Officer in the Mayor's office at the City of Racine, whose name is Kara Pratt. Kara has since moved on, but I really want to give Kara her flowers because this simply wouldn't have happened without Kara. Like this, it's always a question of like, I don't know, is this grant too much work? Is it worth it? Whatever. This got posted, ALA sent it out to a listserv or a few listservs I was on, and I just forwarded it on to Kara and said, hey, this has to do with sustainability and climate change. Like, let me know, let me know if you're interested in it. And within like 5 minutes, she emailed back and was like, oh my God, yes, this is everything I want to be doing with this community. So it just felt perfect for her. And, I really owe this presentation and our whole experience with that grant to Kara. She was the fire that kind of made us decide to do it. So we proposed doing 3 programs for this grant. One was a virtual film discussion that was sort of a requirement of the grant. They gave like 7 climate related films and said, you have to do one program that relates to one of these films. So that was a no-brainer. But the other two were community input sessions. And it was something that that Kara was already working on. She was creating something called an equitable climate action plan for Racine. And she was already doing community input sessions to try to find out what would an equitable climate action plan include according to the people of this community. Would it include, is your priority more green space? Is it better air quality? Is it better water quality? Is it, different transportation options? Is it more bike lanes on the roads? Is it closing down the power plant that's, not far out of the Racine community? Is it changing the transportation system so that our buses are electric, which fortunately the city of Racine has successfully been doing recently? So that was what the idea is, to try to get input from the community. So this is the community's plan and reflects the community's priorities. But what Kara was finding as she was doing these input sessions is she was only getting people who were already concerned with environmentalism and climate change. And as we established, that was older retired people, that was almost exclusively white people, and that was people who were already pretty economically advantaged in our community. So she wanted this to be an opportunity to work on changing that, to get a better reflection of the fuller community in these input sessions. Last thing I'll say about sort of the what and how of how we did this grant, the goals that we put into this grant, and these were very important to us. Kind of two interrelated goals here. One, identify and foster up young, diverse activists to be climate leaders, right? That is something that we don't have in the current environmental activism landscape here. So we want to work on that to make our community sustainable in that way. And the other one that's related is to shift the environmental activist ecosystem in Racine so it better reflects the demographics of the community. I'll just say here, whenever, so these were the impacts that we wanted our programming to have. And they're pretty lofty impacts. A lot of libraries don't think about when they're planning program, like what is the impact exactly that we are trying to have on the community with this. But that tried to be really central to how we thought of everything that we did with this. So to talk about just some of the logistics and details of the grant, it was awarded to 25 public and academic libraries nationwide. The money part was very small, which again was like a part of the reason why it's like, I don't know, is this worth the work? Should I bother with it? I very much feel like it was, but it's like the smallest grant I've ever applied for. It was only $1,000 monetarily, but it also provided awardees with access to a suite of free programming resources about the climate crisis. It provided access and license to screen several films about the climate crisis, like I mentioned before. But maybe the most significant part of the grant was for awardees is it designated these 25 libraries as the first in the nation to be recognized as climate hubs. So that makes us part of this network of resources and of people with expertise in this area, where basically anytime we ever want to do anything with this, whether it's we want to create a rain garden, or like our library, we want to start a seed library, or we want to make we want to put solar, we want to make the building more sustainable somehow, our facilities, anything like this hub could be used as a major resource to tap into for those purposes. A few more details. When the grants were decided upon, 51 other libraries were given $500 grants just to support and encourage them to do programs that address climate change outside of the 25 actual grant awardees. And lastly, I just want to shout out Wisconsin, because not only did Racine successfully apply and receive this grant, but Milwaukee Public Library also did. And lastly, I learned that eventually I learned the funders of the grant were a couple from Madison. So perhaps there was some bias in there, and that's why Wisconsin had 2 libraries that both got the grant, but I think we weren't the only state that had 2 libraries. So glad that Wisconsin is carrying on its legacy of environmental leadership in that way. So just talk about the programs really quickly. The first one we did was this film discussion, Fire and Flood. We gave everybody access to watch on their own time this film called Fire and Flood, Queer Resilience in the Era of Climate Change. And it talks about resilience strategies and tactics that queer people in general have to establish in their lives very commonly, and how they have creatively applied those strategies and tactics, resilience tactics, to the climate crisis in terms of, who's leading when an extreme weather event happens or something like that. So I will say, I think that we did this event in collaboration with the LGBT Center of Southeast Wisconsin. They were a great community partner. It was a very good program, but I will say, I think it was the least transformative program of the 3 that we did, least impactful in terms of those goals that I stated earlier. And in part, that was because, the people who showed up, they were older, they were majority white, they were also majority LGBTQ+, that's one difference, but they were not the folks that we need to accomplish those goals that we talked about to change the ecosystem and diversify the ecosystem of environmental activists in Racine, because every healthy ecosystem needs diversity. If you don't have diversity, your ecosystem becomes unhealthy. So there was that. The one transformative impact I will say, though, about this is we did, for every event we did, we had facilitators, and we did pay them between $100 and $125 each. And we had 2 young queer community members of color be facilitators for this. And they, at the very least, I do think, are now positioned to be leaders on this issue in a different way going forward. And that's really what this all is about. It's about fostering up leadership and inviting people who could be potential leaders that are not old, wealthy white people into this work. So it's almost like giving folks resume builders, or just credentialing them somehow, but also inviting them to know more about this work, to experience a different kind of knowledge and a different level of passion about this work, and be in community with others doing this work. So that, I would say, is the one transformative piece, just the 2 facilitators that we brought in who were really amazing. The other 2 events that we did were these community input sessions. So one prioritized the voices of Black community members, and the other prioritized the voices of Latinx and Spanish-speaking community members. And again, this was to get input on Racine's equitable climate action planning, or action plan, I guess. Something that's really, now these were transformative. We brought in a lot of young community leaders of color into this, who had tons of potential in all sorts of different ways, but who, for the most part, haven't necessarily been leaders in the community around climate issues. But there are people that we, it was open to anyone, but some that we specifically reached out to and narrowcasted to were people that we thought could lead in this way. Something that was really important about these input sessions is when we were reaching out to young community leaders of color whose input we wanted to prioritize having at these. We used the money of the grant just for very small stipends. We just said, if you come and participate in this, we'll give you a $20 stipend, right? So it's like nothing. But for a lot of people in this community, especially young community members of color, like $20 for an hour program is like more than they're making at their job, right? So I say this in terms of when we're thinking about sustainability, we always have to be thinking about economic sustainability in that too. Like people should just be, I'll mention this a few more times, but people need to be paid for their labor. People need to be paid for their lived experience, for their input. Like this is our community saying, we want something from you, community members, so we need to make that a sustainable option for them, because they've got a lot of other things vying for their attention. So we were able to do that. We worked with community partners for each one. So for the Black community member event, we worked with a group called Professional Women Network for Service, which is like an all Black women-led organization. And for the Latinx and Spanish-speaking event, we worked with Voces de la Frontera, which is an immigrants' rights organization, and Miss Latina Racine, which is sort of this amazing like leadership program that has produced tons of young Latina leaders, amazing young Latina leaders in this community. I'll just mention really quickly two people in the middle of this picture. So the Black man throwing up the peace sign, that's Carl Fields. He acted as one of the facilitators for the Black community member session. And next to him in the hat is County Supervisor Fabi Maldonado, who was one of our partners. He was a participant in the Latinx event, but he also helped us, both of them helped us identify leaders in those communities, young potential leaders in those communities that they thought these people would be good to invite in, to foster up into this sort of leadership. And this picture is actually of us. We're on the Capitol steps in DC. This was in June of 2019, and we're getting ready to lobby legislators on climate legislation with about 1,000 other people from Citizens Climate Lobby. So the fact that they did this even identified them, right, as leaders of color who have priorities and have some experience and knowledge on environmental issues. And so that was great because then we could bring them into this, and it continues to build their portfolio of work around this. So we'll talk about the results, or at least the most salient results, I think, of this grant work. Ultimately, we had the largest gathering of Black community members to discuss exclusively climate and environmental problems and solutions ever to come together in Racine history, at least according to everyone we talked to. Like everyone with the living knowledge of this said that that was what that was. And we also got the same feedback about the Latinx and Spanish-speaking community member event, that it was the largest gathering ever to discuss climate and environmental problems and solutions in the Racine community. Now, we're not talking about a huge number there. Like both events were only between like 20 and 30 people, but that is just how effective libraries can be. When you notice that there's an omission of something like that happening, and all you really need to do is bring together 20 or 30 people in a strategic way, an intentional way, like that is going to have very long-lasting ripples and impacts that benefit the community in the ways we were looking to do, those goals. And especially if it's fostered more, and if those waters are stirred more, it will just grow and grow and grow upon itself until there's a greater level of health in this way in the community. We also reinvested the entirety of the $1,000 grant into our community. So that was through those $20 participant stipends, that was through the facilitator and payments and a translator payment for the Latinx and Spanish speaking event. And it was also through the community partner stipends for the organizations that co-sponsored with us. And that was small, like it was less than $40 to each of those community partners. But you know, that was money that didn't exist in this community before. It was money that we could have like bought things from Amazon or other outlets where that money would have gone out of the community immediately. But I am very proud that we were able to just directly invest that in individuals and in some of the most vulnerable or economically disadvantaged individuals in our community, but also into like grassroots organizations in this community. That's $1,000 that wasn't in this community that really got stuck in this community. And lastly, it really raised the profile of the Racine Library locally and nationally in some small ways. I'll just talk about a few of those small ways. We were featured, I did an interview on Yale Climate Connections. So this is a nationally syndicated daily radio program. They do these little like 90-second spots. They're really cool. And it's heard over 650 radio frequencies. So it's a very big platform that gets in a lot of ears. And the title of ours was How Libraries Are Improving Climate Literacy in Their Communities. So, I really encourage you, like, look up Yale Climate Connections and search my name, Nick Dembski, and spend 90 seconds listening to that little spot. But that was one way that our work got really highlighted and platformed nationwide. Another one, an interview I did with Hannah Arata from the ALA Public Programs Office was published on the programminglibrarian.org, which is a resource of the Public Programs Office of ALA. And that's called A Community Engagement Revolution, How Paying Program Participants Can Make Your Library More Equitable. I really want to encourage people to take some time and look up this article, just because this article really focuses specifically just on the like, people need to be paid for their labor. We should change the entire models of how we think of programming and community engagement and like turn them into budget line items, basically. And that would be a whole entire presentation unto itself, which we don't have time for, but this interview really focuses on that. So I really encourage people to check that out, because I want libraries in all institutions to be thinking of that more differently. I'll skip to the bottom one. Obviously the most important thing that came out of all of this is I got to speak at the Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference today. Big win, very awesome. I am really excited about that, and I do just want to say thank you again. But the last thing that I'll illustrate a little more, also spoke at the ALA annual conference, a session called, this was just this past June in DC, session called Climate Justice, Creating Sustainability Programming with EDI in Mind. Myself and two other people from two other libraries that were awardees of this grant were asked to come and speak at a panel. This was proposed by ALA, and so when it was accepted into the conference, they said, well, we'll pay for your airfare, we'll pay for most of your lodging, we'll pay for your food and your ground transportation. And so that was like thousands of dollars for each of us. So again, just like more investment. Not only did I get to have that continuing education opportunity and networking opportunity, not on my institution's dime for the most part, but also like I got to go and promote some of the amazing work that we're doing at our institution and show how we're leading nationally in certain ways. So just a few pictures from that. The left is Christina Gomez, who was at Milwaukee Public Library and wrote that grant there. Christina's amazing, a dynamo of a librarian and just a great friend of mine. On the right, that's me looking like I'm about to sneeze with my beautiful Beyonce hair cascading down. But then in the middle, I want to point out specifically, if you don't know who that is, that's Mia Henry. Write her name down, Mia Henry. And she's an activist and consultant and her consulting firm is called Freedom Lifted, which is out of Chicago. But in terms of EDI, anti-racism, things of that nature in libraries, like Mia Henry is one of the baddest in the game. And she has a lot of resources for libraries to check out at Freedom Lifted. They have a training series that's virtual and like you know, at your own pace, called Justice in Public Libraries, that I would recommend to any librarian or library that wants their staff to understand EDI and anti-racism in like really nuanced ways, and justice, right? So again, Mia Henry, Freedom Lifted. I was so excited. I was the one who said, why don't we see if Mia Henry will moderate this? And I was so excited. She said, yes. She's done a ton of work with PLA. It's just a great leader in the field. So one other, that's Bea Echeverria there from Evanston Public Library in Illinois, our other panel presenter. And, you know, just us having a great time with all of it. So I'm just at about time, but I'm going to conclude by saying these are some of the most salient points I guess I want you to take away from this. Equity and sustainability are interdependent, and libraries must lead on these issues for and with their communities. 1. 2, people should be paid for their labor, expertise, and lived experience. Institutions need to budget line items for what they want in general, for whatever institutions want, right? If what we want is to desegregate the environmental activism landscape of our community, then we need to invest real dollars in that and see it reflected in budget line items. 3, primary goal of library programming should be to benefit, whoops, that's not what we wanted to do. Let's try that one more time. Should be to benefit and impact the community in meaningful ways and ultimately change it for the better. This can be done most effectively in partnership with other community players and not through self-motivated programming that is just trying to get more people in the building or whatever. And lastly, any library or librarian can do any of these things if the will, persistence, and passion are there to see it through. I don't want anyone to walk away saying like, oh, like that's a bigger community, or like that's, you know, Racine's like a little more left-leaning or a little more progressive and it just would never work here or whatever. Like it really, it differs on scope and scale, but it really is possible for any library worker or library to do this work if the will, persistence, and passion are there to see it through. And that is my time, y'all. So this is my contact info. I'd be happy to hear from any of you after this, so feel free to stay in touch. But I think we have time for some questions also.
We do have time for some questions. So if you have some, please be sure and put them in the chat or the question and answer, or if you have comments or, you know, anything, that would be great. I am wondering, Nick, what has your library been like? Have you been able to do something like this? You know, what's next for your library in this realm?
Well, yeah, our library is doing a lot, but I guess it depends. I'm sort of touching on a few different realms here, right? So it depends on what realm you're talking about. You might be talking about sustainability. Is that?
I'm wondering if you like, have you done more, you know, paying people to participate in feedback sessions? Have you done, or, and like, yeah, and any more in the connection between sustainability and equity?
So I would say, I mean, this is gonna kind of answer it from a weird angle, but like one thing that we've hugely done over the last year, and I have to really give credit to our director and our leadership team for this, which you know, I was certainly an active part in it. But as I said, like sustainability, there cannot be sustainability in any ecosystem or even health in any ecosystem if there isn't diversity. And that's something that I think a lot of libraries in terms of their staff really struggle with. And we see that in the numbers, like the field has been talking about it for decades, literally. And we see in the metrics that even though we talk about it, we're just like not able to move that needle field wide very much. I'm very proud of the last year at our library. So like, you know, I've worked there just about 16 years in March. And in my 16 years there, up until a year ago, every single full-time librarian we hired was white. Every single, including me, every single part-time librarian we hired was white, including me. And even every single substitute librarian we hired was white, including me, aside from one East Indian woman who was with us for a very short time. That is just not reflective of our community. And it's especially, I mean, not only our community, but it's even less reflective of the people that we serve in the building every day. So in the last year, we were able to change some things structurally and with recruitment and retention to really shift that and really change the demographics and start hiring from within our community and more intentionally in different ways. And the last thing that I'll just say about that is like one of the structural pieces that really needed to happen for us was we had to get rid of the degree requirement. We actually got rid of all degree requirements for that. Part of what that was having us do, like we have this great resource in front of us of, you know, lots of a very populous place that's very diverse with very talented people. We put that master's degree requirement on and immediately we bypass all of those people other than maybe like 200 out of the 200,000, right? All of those people are now ineligible to serve the community that they know better than anyone else. So it just didn't make sense. And so in terms of equity and sustainability, interdependence thereof, that's one thing we've gotten to do last year.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure.
And I'm looking to see if there are any other questions. I'm not seeing any popping up there. I'm thinking you gave us a lot of food for thought. I guess my only other thought is I know that there are quite a few, I'm seeing some here, libraries in very rural areas that aren't racially diverse, but there are other kinds of diversity. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about, you know, kind of taking this model and applying it differently in different situations.
Definitely. Well, I mean, you really, you know, set it up well, right? Like every community has its own kinds of diversity. So like knowing the community and being honest about what that is. But, you know, what the reason why I'm talking about the projects that we did in the terms that I am is because the issue was, let's just say for our environmental activism landscape, right? It wasn't reflective of our community. That's the problem. If you are in a like nearly all white community, you know, certainly your library staff or your environmental activism landscape or whatever is not going to look like Racine's. That just wouldn't make sense. But knowing what your community is, knowing what kinds of diversity exist within it, and also I guess I really want to like emphasize that part about invitation, like actively. So there's broadcasting, right, where we put our flyers up in the community, we send out an email to 30,000 people on our distribution list anyways. We send out the press releases to all our press contacts. But then there's narrowcasting, which is like seeing you know, individuals or small groups of people. And there's just power in the personal ask, right? And in making relationship there. And the more you can call people into this sort of work and to any of your work at the library, like it's just really meaningful and beneficial for the whole community.
Thank you, thank you. And I love that idea of narrowcasting. I'd never heard that term before, but I definitely picked up on that. One last question. Any other influential people we should look up other than Mia Henry or Maya? Mia
Yeah.
Henry about climate justice, either in general or specific to libraries that you know of off the top of your head?
Gosh. I should be more prepared for this question. I mean, specific to libraries, I don't think, I mean, like, this is sort of gets to the whole point of the presentation in some ways. This is about creating leaders where leaders don't already exist. So like y'all, I think that was maybe Sarah Corso who asked that question, I'm not sure, who's an amazing library leader in the state of Wisconsin. But like, that's us, y'all, you know, like there isn't, I mean, there's, you know, there are things like ALA's Sustainability Roundtable, and there are definitely spaces where this is a priority among library workers, and I'm really grateful for that. Obviously that climate, that network of climate hubs that there's at least 25 libraries that are a part of now. There are spaces where that exists, but like it's really on us to become the leaders on this, to lead in different ways, and to like make the rest of the world understand that this is actually a role that libraries have to play. So for individuals, I guess I'm you know, on the spot, nothing's coming to my mind right now, but I will think about it. And if there's an opportunity to, I'll try to contribute that afterwards.
That's great. Thank you, Nick. I'm sorry to put you on the spot like that, but
Not at all, not at all.
that was a great rousing answer. So that's wonderful. Thank you. And thanks everyone for coming today. Remember that we have another session in this track about trauma in public libraries that is in this afternoon, and in between now and then we also have a stretch break, which will be I'm looking forward to that. So thank you all for attending, and thank you, Nick, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.
Cole.